Myst, the Book of Tiana continues, as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the Plurality Report, who has since left the city in order to live in a cabin in the woods and search for Sasquatch. Part 1.2. Atris lay there a long time, unable to sleep, staring at the pattern of the shadows on the smooth, curved wall of the node, wondering what the gifts meant. His letters had contained the usual cheerful news from home, chatter about old friends from his mother, word of council matters from his father. But his mind kept going back to the note. That Veovis had written at all was amazing. That he had sent gifts was, well, astonishing. And not just any gifts, but just those things that he most needed in his work. Oh, there were plenty of scales and compasses he could use, property of the guild, but not his own. Nor were the guild's instruments anything as fine as those Veovis had gotten him. Why, they were as good as those that hung from Master Tilanus' own tool belt. When finally he did manage to sleep, it was to find himself dreaming of his school days, his mind, for some strange yet obvious reason, going back to a day in his 13th year when, tired of turning his back on Veovis's constant taunts, he had turned and fought him. He woke to find Master Tilanus shaking him.
"Come, Atris. Third bell has sounded. We need to talk."
The cabin door was locked. Master Tilanus sat behind his desk, looking up at Atris.
"Well, Atris, how did you fare with Master Kedry?"
Atris hesitated, not sure how much to say. The truth was, he did not like the task he had been given. It made him feel uncomfortable. Tilanus coaxed him gently.
"You said he felt our methods were inefficient?"
"Oh, indeed, Guildmaster. He constantly commented upon how slow our methods are, how overcautious."
"And do you agree with him, Atris? Do you think, perhaps, that we are too pedantic in our ways?"
"Not at all, Guildmaster. There is, after all, no hurry. Whether we reach the surface this year or next does not matter. Safety must be our first concern." Tilanus stared at him a moment, then nodded.
"Good. Now let me tell you a few things, Atris. First, I am aware that this task is not really to your liking."
Atris made to object, but Tilanus raised a hand.
"Make no mistake, Atris. I realize you are not at ease looking after Master Kedry, but I chose you for a reason. The good master seeks to sound us out on certain topics, to survey our attitudes, if you like."
Atris looked horrified at the thought. "Should I watch what I say, Master?"
"Not at all, Atris. I have no fear that you will say anything that might upset Master Kedry. That is why I chose you. You are like basalt, Atris, solid through and through. But it would help me if, at the end of each day, you would note down those areas in which Master Kedry seemed most interested."
Atris hesitated. "Might I ask why, Master?"
"You may, but you must keep my answer strictly to yourself."
Tilanus paused, steepling his fingers before his chin.
"There is to be a meeting of the council a month from now. It seems that some of the older members have had a change of heart. They have thought long and hard about whether we should make contact with the surface dwellers or not, and a few of them now feel it might not be quite so good an idea as it first seemed. Indeed, they might even ask us to abandon the expedition."
Unable to help himself, Atris slammed his fist down on the desk. "But they can't!" Master Tilanus smiled tolerantly.
"If that is their final word, then so be it. We must do what they say. We cannot argue with the council."
Atris lowered his head, acknowledging what Master Tilanus had said. The council was the ruling body of Dani, and their word was law. His own opinion was irrelevant. It was what the 5 great lords and the 18 guildmasters decided that was important.
That is why, Tilenus went on, it is so important that we impress our guests, Atris, for they represent the 18 and the 5. What they report back might yet prove crucial in swaying the decision, either for us or against us.
I see. And suddenly he did see. Master Kedry was not just any busybody, butting his nose into their affairs. Kedry was a potential enemy, or ally, of the expedition. All of their hard work, their patient progress through the rock, might prove to no avail if Kedry spoke against them. "I'm not sure I can do this, Master." Tilenus nodded.
"I understand. Do you want to be relieved of this duty, Atris?"
He stared at Master Tilenus. It was as simple as that, was it? And then he understood. It was like going home. He could go home at any time, but it was his choice not to go home that gave this voyage its meaning. So with this he could quit, but... Atris lowered his head respectfully. "I shall do as you wish, Guildmaster." Tilenus smiled broadly.
"Good. Now go and eat. You have a long day ahead of you."
4 long, exacting days followed, one upon another. Atris was ready to go back to Master Tilenus and beg to be taken from his task when news came to him that they were ready to start drilling the next section. Master Kedry was in the refectory when the news came, and, delighted that he could at last show the legislators something real and tangible, Atris interrupted him at table.
"Yes, guildsman?"
Kedry said, staring at Atris. The conversation at table had died the moment Atris had stepped into the cabin. All 4 of the observers seated about the narrow table had turned to stare at him. "Forgive me, masters," Atris said, bowing to them all, "but I felt you should know at once that we are about to commence the next stage of the excavation." There was at once a babble of sound from all sides. Some stood immediately and began to make their way out. Others began to hurriedly finish their meals. Only Kedry seemed unmoved by the news.
"Thank you, Atris," he said after a moment. "I shall finish my meal, then join you. Wait for me at the site."
10 minutes later, Master Kedry stepped out of the excavator and walked across to where they had set up the sample drills. The other observers had already gathered, waiting for operations to commence.
"Let us see if I understand this correctly," Kedry began before Atris could say a word. "Master Guerin's sounding is a rough yet fairly accurate guide to whether the rock ahead of us is sound or otherwise, correct? The next stage, this stage, is to drill a series of long boreholes to provide us with a precise breakdown of the different kinds of rock we are about to cut through."
Atris nodded, for the first time smiling at the legislator.
"Oh, I can retain some minimal information, guildsman," Kedry said, a faint amusement on his own lips. "It isn't only contracts I can read, but there is one thing you can tell me, Atris, and that's where all the rock goes to."
"The rock?"
"But I thought you knew, Master. I thought everyone knew. It is reconstituted." "Reconstituted?" "In the fusion compounder. The machine reconstitutes the very matter of the rock, reforging its atomic links and thereby reducing its volume by a factor of 200. The result is Nara." "So that's what Nara is." Kedry nodded thoughtfully. "Can I see this fusion compounder?"
Atris smiled, suddenly liking the man. "See it, Master? Why, you can operate it if you want." Atris took a sheet of paper and, for Master Kedry's benefit, sketched out a cross-section diagram of the tunnel. "This," he said, indicating the small, shaded circle at the very center of it, "is the hole made by the excavator. As you can see, it's a comparatively small hole, less than a third the total circumference of the tunnel. This," and he pointed to the 2 closely parallel circles on the outer wall of the tunnel, "is the area that the cycler removes.
The cycler?
Kedri looked puzzled. That's what we call it. It's because it cuts a giant ring from the rock surrounding the central borehole.
Ah, then that would be the big spider-like machine, right?
Atris nodded. Only 2 days before they had exhaustively inspected all of the different excavating tools. What happens is that the cycler removes a circular track around the outer edge to a depth of 1 1/4 spans. We then fill that space with a special seal of Dawny stone, let that set, then chirp out the collar, that is, the rock between the inner tunnel and the seal.
Why 1 1/4?
Atris sketched something on the pad, then handed it across. As you can see, we insert a special metal brace 1/4 of a span wide, deep in the cut, then pour in the sealant stone. Then, when the collar has been chipped away, we remove the brace and set up the cycler ready to start all over. Kedri frowned.
Forgive me, guildsman, but once again it seems a most laborious way of going about things.
Maybe so, Master Kedri, but safe. When we make a tunnel, we make it to last.
Yes,
Kedri nodded thoughtfully.
Still, it seems a lot of effort merely to talk to a few surface dwellers, don't you think?
It was the first direct question of that type Kedri had asked him, and for a moment Atris wondered if he might not simply ignore it or treat it as rhetorical, but Kedri, it seemed, was waiting for an answer.
Well, guildsman, have you no opinion on the matter?
Master Tolanus came to his rescue.
Forgive me, Master Kedri. Guildsman Atris might well have an opinion, but I am sure he would be the first to admit that at 25 he is far too young and inexperienced to express it openly. However, if you would welcome the opinion of someone of greater years?
Kedri laughed.
Oh, I know your opinion, Master Tolanus. I simply thought it would be refreshing to seek a different, younger view on things. Oh, come now, Kedri. Do you really think our masters on council would be in the least interested in what a young guildsman, even one as brilliant as Atris here, has to say? Why, Lord Tula is near on 11 times young Atris's age. Do you think he would be interested?
Kedri bowed his head, conceding the point.
Then let us proceed with more important matters,
Tolanus continued quickly, before Kedri might steer the conversation back onto more tricky ground.
Normally, we would take bore samples at this stage, but as you are so keen to see us in action, Master Kedri, I have decided to waive those for once and go direct to drilling.
The news seemed to cheer Kedri immensely.
Excellent,
he said, rubbing his hands together.
We will need protective clothing of any kind?
Master Tolanus shook his head.
No, but you will need to be inside the second craft. When we drill, we drill.
The node gate was closed behind them, its airtight seal ensuring that not a single particle of rock would escape back down the tunnel. The temporary camp had been packed up and stored, the sounding capsule attached to the back of the second excavator, which now rested against the back wall of the node, slightly to the left of the bore site. 2 large observation lenses had been mounted on the ceiling to either side of the site, high up so that they'd not be hit by flying rock. All was now ready. Master Tolanus had only to give the order. Atris was in the second vehicle, standing at the back of the chart room behind the observers, who looked up at the big screen, watching as the excavator was maneuvered into place. In operation, it seemed more like something living than a machine, its sinuous, quiet movements like those of a giant snake. Atris looked on with quiet satisfaction. He had first seen an excavator in action when he was 4, when his father, a guildsman before him, had taken him to see the cutting of a new tunnel between the outer caverns. Kedri, in particular, seemed impressed. He was leaning forward, staring at the screen in fascination.
In place,
Master Tolanus called out, his voice transmitted into the chart room where they sat. A moment later, a siren sounded, its whine rising and then falling again. The snout of the excavator came around and seemed almost to kiss the bore mark on the rock face. So gentle was its touch, but the great drill bit had a brutal look to it, and as they watched, they saw the cooling fluid began to dribble down the thick grooves of the drill. Slowly the drill began to turn, nudging blindly into the rock, the mechanical whir of its slow spiral accompanied by a deeper, grinding sound that seemed to climb in pitch as the bit whirred faster and faster until it was a squeal, great clouds of dust billowing out from all around it. The noise was now deafening, the vibrations making the second excavator ring like a struck bell. Slowly the great sphere of the node filled with dust, partly obscuring their view. Yet every now and then they would glimpse the excavator again, each time buried deeper and deeper into the rock, like some ferocious feral animal boring into the soft flesh of its victim. From time to time there would be a clang or thud as a large fragment of rock struck their craft. But there was no danger. The excavators were built to withstand massive pressures. Even a major collapse would merely trap the machine, not crush it. After a while, Kedry turned and looked to Atris.
"It's a fearsome sight,"
he said, raising his voice above the din. Atris nodded. The first time he had seen it, he had felt a fear deep in the pit of his stomach. Yet afterward, talking to his father, he had remembered it with wonder and a sense of pride that this was what his guild's people did. Perhaps it was even that day when he had decided to follow his father into the Guild of Surveyors. "Watch the tail!" he shouted, indicating the screen as, briefly, the excavator came into view again. It was almost wholly in the rock now, yet even as they watched, the tail end of the craft began to lash from side to side, again like a living thing, scoring the smooth-bored wall of the tunnel with tooth-shaped gashes.
"Why does it do that?"
Kedry shouted back.
"To give our men a purchase on the wall. Those gashes are where we begin to dig out the collar. It makes it much easier for us."
Kedry nodded.
"Clever. You think of everything."
Yes, Atris thought, but then we have had 1,000 generations to think of everything. In the sudden silence, the excavator backed out of the hole, its segmented sides coated in dust, its drill head glowing red despite the constant stream of coolant. Inside the node, the dust was slowly settling.
"Can we go outside and see for ourselves now?"
One of the other observers, Jair, a master in the Guild of Writers, asked.
"I'm afraid not," Atris answered him. "It's much too hot. Besides, you would choke on the dust. Even our men will have to wear breathing suits for a while. No, first they will have to spray the node with water to settle the dust. Then, once the drill bit has cooled a little, we shall start pumping air back into the node from outside. Only then will they start the clearing up process." "And the next stage of drilling?"
Kedry asked, turning fully in his seat and leaning over the back of the chair to stare at Atris.
"That begins almost at once, Master," Atris answered. "Look."
Even as he spoke, a door opened in the side of the excavator and 2 young guildsmen stepped out, suited up, air canisters feeding the sealed helmets they were wearing. They were both carrying what looked like spears, only these spears were curved and had sharp diamond tips at the end.
"They'll set the cycler up straight away. We should be able to start the second stage of drilling as soon as that's done. Meanwhile, the rest of the men will begin the clearing up operation."
As the 2 suited guildsmen began to put together the great cutting hoop of the cycler, 2 more stepped out, trailing flaccid lengths of hose behind them. Getting into position in the center of the platform, one of them turned and gave a hand signal. Almost at once the hoses swelled and a jet of water gushed from each, arching up into the ceiling of the great sphere. As the two men adjusted the nozzles of their hoses, the fountain of water was transformed into a fine mist that briefly seemed to fill the node. It lasted only a minute or two, but when the water supply was cut, the node was clear of dust, though a dark paste now covered every surface. Atris smiled. "If you ever wondered what we surveyors do most of the time, it's this, cleaning up." There was laughter.
"You talk as if you dislike the job, Atris,"
Kedry said with a smile.
"Not at all. It gives me time to think."
Kedry stared at him a moment, a thoughtful expression in his eyes. Then he turned back, leaving Atris to wonder just what was going on inside the legislator's head. The four observers stepped out from the excavator, their movements slightly awkward in the unfamiliar protective suits Master Tilanus had insisted they wear. Kedry, as ever, led the way, Atris at his side as they stepped over to the tunnel's mouth. The cycler had done its job several times already, and the cadets had already chipped out a section 20 spans in length and sprayed it with a coating of Dawny stone. Further down the tunnel they could see the dark O of the central borehole running straight into the rock, and surrounding it like some strange skeletal insect, the cycler encased in its translucent sheath. Two brightly glowing fire marbles, the size of clenched fists, were suspended from the ceiling. In their blazing blue-white light, a number of cadets loaded rock onto a mobile trailer.
"This is more like it,"
Kedry said with an air of satisfaction.
"This is just how I imagined it."
They walked slowly toward the lamps. Surrounding them, the finished section of the tunnel had the look of permanence. Moving past the young guildsmen, they approached the rock face, stopping beneath the anchored feet of the cycler. They looked up past the sleek engine of the cycler to where its great revolving hoop was at rest against the fence. The transparent sheath surrounding the cycler was there to catch the excavated rock and channel it down into a chute that fed straight into the central borehole. From there, the cadets would collect it up using great suction hoses and feed it into the pulverizer. Kedry looked to Atris.
"You remember your promise, Atris?"
"I have not forgotten."
"Then what are you waiting for?"
Atris turned and signaled to his friend Ephanis, who was working nearby. At once, Ephanis came across and, positioning himself at the controls of the cycler, gave 2 long blasts on the machine's siren. Kedry made a face.
"Yours must be the noisiest of guilds, young Atris. It seems you do nothing without a great blast of air beforehand."
Atris smiled. It was true. If anyone was up there, they would surely hear them long before they broke through to the surface. "If you would make sure your masks are kept down, masters," he said, looking from one to another. "It should be perfectly safe, but if the sheath was to be punctured, your headgear should protect you."
"Cautious,"
Kedry muttered.
"Ever cautious."
Slowly, the great cutting hoop of the cycler began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster, at first only skimming the surface of the rock, whistling all the while. Then, abruptly, the whole top of the cycler seemed to lean into the rock face, a great grinding buzz going up as if 1,000 swarms of bees had all been released at once. Chips of rock flew like hailstones against the clear, thick surface of the sheath. Slowly, the arm of the cycler, raised on its hydraulics, moved toward the horizontal as the spinning, cutting hoop bit deeper and deeper into the rock, carving its great O like the outer rim of an archery target. In less than 3 minutes it was done. Slowly the machine eased back, the hoop slipping from the rock, its surface steaming hot. As the observers turned, 4 of the young surveyors wheeled the great metal hoop of the brace down the tunnel toward them. They had seen already how it was mounted on the cutting hoop, then pushed into place. So easy it seemed, yet every stage was fraught with dangers and difficulties. As the guildsman took over, removing the covering sheath and fitting the brace, Kedry and his fellows stood back out of their way. Only when they were finished and the brace was in place did Atris take them through, past the base of the cycler and into the central borehole. It was darker here, but the piles of rock stood out against the light from outside. Atris pointed to two machines that stood to one side. The first was recognizably the machine they used to gather up all the fragments of rock, a great suction hose coiling out from the squat metallic sphere at its center. The second was small and squat, with what looked like a deep, wedge-shaped metal tray on top. Ignoring the rock gatherer, Atris stooped and, picking up one of the larger chunks of rock, handed it to Kedry. "Well, Guildmaster, do you want to feed the compounder?" Kedry grinned and, taking the rock over to the machine, dropped it into the tray.
"What now?"
he asked, looking to Atris. In answer, Atris stepped up and pressed a button on the face of the fusion compounder. At once, a metal lid slid across over the tray. There was a low grinding sound, and then the lid slid back. The tray was now empty.
"And the Nara?"
Atris crouched and indicated a bulky red cylinder that rested in a mesh cage on the underside of the machine. "The Nara is kept in there," Atris said, "in its basic, highly compacted form until we need to use it."
"But surely it would just solidify."
Atris nodded. "It does. The cylinder is just temporary, a kind of jacket used to mold the Nara into a storable form. When we have enough of the Nara, we load up another machine with the cylinders. In effect, that machine is little more than a large pressure oven, operating at immensely high pressures, within which the cylinders are burned away and the Nara brought back to a more volatile and thus usable state."
"The sprayer, you mean?"
Kedry said, staring at Atris in open astonishment. Atris nodded. Kedry crouched, staring at the bright red cylinder in awe, conscious of the immense power of these simple-seeming machines. Then, like a schoolboy who has been briefly let off the leash, he straightened up and, looking about him, began to gather up rocks to feed into the machine. That night, Master Tilenus took Atris aside once more.
"I hear our friends enjoy themselves today. That was a good idea of yours to let them operate a few of the less dangerous machines. They're bookish types, and such types are impressed by gadgetry. And who knows, even something this small may serve to sway them for the good."
"Then you think it is good?"
"Making contact with the surface dwellers?"
Tilenus smiled.
"Yes, just so long as it is done discreetly."
Atris frowned. "How do you mean?"
"I mean, I do not think we should mix our race with theirs, nor should we think of any extended relationship with them. They are likely, after all, to be a primitive race, and primitive races, as we have learned to our cost, tend to be warlike in nature. It would not do to have them pouring down our tunnels into Dani."
"But what kind of relationship does that leave us?" Tilenus shrugged. Then,
"We could go among them as observers, that is, providing we are not too dissimilar from them as a species."
"But why? What would we learn from doing that?"
"They might have certain cultural traits, artifacts and the like, that we might use, or they might even have developed certain instruments or machines, though, personally, I find that most unlikely."
"It seems, then, that Master Kedry is right after all, and that ours is something of a fool's errand." Master Tilenus sat forward, suddenly alert.
"Are those his words?"
"Something like. It was something he was saying to one of the other observers, Jair, I think. As they were coming away from the rock face, Jair was wondering aloud whether there was anyone up there on the surface anyway."
"And?"
Atris paused, trying to recall the conversation. "Master Kedry was of the opinion that there would be. His view was that the climatic conditions are ideal for the development of an indigenous species."
"And on what did he base this claim?"
"It seems that all four of them have seen copies of the book."
"The Book of Earth,"
Tilenus said, nodding thoughtfully.
"It was written by Grand Master Renaref himself, Atris, perhaps the greatest of the ancient writers. Yet it is said that it was the one he wrote as an apprentice.
So Master Kedri also claimed, yet most troubling, perhaps, was what Master Jair said next. Tilenus' eyes seemed to pierce Atris's.
Go on.
Jair said that whether there was a humanoid race up there on the surface or not, he nevertheless wondered whether so much time and effort ought to have been spent on such a speculative venture.
Speculative. Did he say speculative?
Atris nodded. Master Tilenus sat back and stared thoughtfully. For a while he did not speak. Then, looking at Atris, he asked,
And what do you think, Atris? Is it worth it?
Yes, Guildmaster, to know for certain that we are sharing a world with another intelligent species, that surely is worth twice the time and effort that we have given it.